Hello everyone, my name is Mishika Agarwal here, and today I'm going to be reading George's Marvelous Medicine by Roald Dahl, illustrated by Quentin Blake. George's Marvelous Medicine, Chapter 1. Grandma. Grandma. I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning. So be a good boy and don't get up into mischief. This was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him to wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, said the mother. Then out she went, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, "Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine." "No, Grandma," George said. "And try to behave yourself for once while she's away." "Yes, Grandma," George said. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or sister. His family was poor. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived was on miles away from anywhere. So there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs, hens, and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as the grisly old Brunian of a grandma. Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. "You can make a cup of tea for a start," Grandma said to George. "That'll keep you out of mischief for some time." "Yes, Grandma," George said, tired. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small, puckered up mouth like a dog's bottom. "How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma?" asked George. "1 spoon," she said, "and no milk." Most grandmothers are lovely, kind, helpful old ladies, but not this one. She spent all day every day sitting in her chair by the window and grumbling, gripping about something or the other. Never once, even on her best days, had she smiled at George and said, "Well, how are you this morning, George?" Or, "Why don't you and I have a game of snakes and ladders?" Or, "How was school today?" She didn't seem to care about other people, only about herself. She was a miserable old grouch. George went into the kitchen and he made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He stirred 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. "It's not sweet enough. Put more sugar in, George." George took the cup back to the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully to Grandma. "Where's the saucer? I won't have a cup without the saucer." George fetched her a saucer. "And what about a teaspoon, if you please?" "I stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it well." "I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much," she said. "Fetch me a teaspoon, now." When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when she had him on her own that she began treating him badly. George fetched her a teaspoon. "Do you know what's the matter with you?" the old woman said, staring at George over the rim of the teacup with those bright, wicked little eyes. "You're growing too fast. Boys who grow too fast become stupid and lazy." "But I can't help if I'm growing fast, Grandma," George said. "Of course you can," she snapped. "Growing is a nasty, childish habit. But we have to grow, Grandma. If we didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups." "Rubbish, boy, rubbish. Look at me. Am I growing?" "Certainly not," she said. "But you did once, Grandma." "Only very little," the old woman answered. "I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with the other nice childish habits like laziness and disobedience and greed and sloppiness and untidiness and stupidity. You haven't given up any of these things, have you?" "I'm still only a little boy, Grandma."
You're 8 years old, she snorted. That's old enough to be in better. If you don't stop growing soon, it's gonna be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? It's ridiculous, she went on. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a very good look at Grandma. She was certainly a very tiny person. Her legs were so short, and she had to give in a footstool to put her feet on, and she had her head only came halfway up the back of the armchair. Daddy said that's fine for a man to be so small, said George. Don't listen to your daddy, Grandma said. Listen to me. But how do I stop myself from growing? George asked her. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow up the wrong way, she snapped, up instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her. I never grow up, always down. Yes, Grandma, and stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Oh no, I don't like cabbage, George said. It's not what you like or what you don't like, Grandma snapped. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage, and it has caterpillar of it on it so much better. Ouch, George said. Caterpillars give you brains, the old woman said. Mummy washes them down the sink, George said. Mummy is as stupid as you are, Grandma said. Cabbage doesn't taste of anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs, too. Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. When I see a living slug on a piece of lettuce, Grandma said, I gobble it up before it crawls away. Delicious. She squeezed her lips together so tight that her mouth became tiny as a wrinkled hole. Delicious, she said again. Worms and slugs and beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you. You're joking, Grandma. I never joke, she said. Beetles are perhaps best of all. They go crunch. Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a beetle inside some stem of a stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? You find all sorts of nice things on stick of raw celery, the woman went on. Sometimes it's earwigs. I don't want to hear about it, cried George. A fat big earwig is very tasty, Grandma said, licking her lips. But you've got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a sharp pair of nippers on its back end. So if it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwig first, chop, chop, before it bites you. George starts edging towards the door. He wanted to get as far as possible from this filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She said, pointing a finger straight at George's face. You're trying to get away from Grandma. Little George stood by the door staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back at him. Could it be, George wondered, that she was a witch? He had always thought that witches were only in fairy tales, but now he was not so sure. Come closer to me, little boy, she said, beckoning to him with a horny finger. Come closer to me, and I will tell you secrets. George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. I know a great many secrets, she said. Suddenly she smiled. It was a thin, icy smile, the kind of snake might get you before it bites you. Come over here to Grandma and she'll whisper secrets to you. George took a step backwards, edging closer to the door. You mustn't be frightened of your old Grandma, she said, smiling that icy smile. George took another step backwards. Some of us, she said, and all at once she was leaning forward in her chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard her use before. Some of us, she said, magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shape. A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened. Some of us, the old woman went on, have fire in our tongues, and sparks in our bellies, and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on the end and your eyes pop out of their sockets. George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed to be stuck to the floor. We know how to make your nails drop off and teeth grow out of your fingers instead. George began to tremble. It was the face that frightened him most of all. The frosty smile, the brilliant unblinking eyes. We know how you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out of behind of you. Grandma! He cried out. Stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other. George made a dive for the door. It doesn't matter where you run, he heard her saying. You won't ever get away. George ran to the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Well, this was all for today, the chapter Grandma. In the next video, part 2, I'm going to be reading the next chapter. Thank you, and I hope you had fun.